Well, look, it's good to see all of you tonight. Seems like just yesterday when we were all here around this same campfire ring and telling stories and having fun. Gosh, we do this several nights a week, don't we? Well, I'm glad, because it kind of breaks up the monotony and it's good to see y'all. Kind of makes us feel a little more attached to the world. And tonight is going to be a great night for us to tell some more of that story by Joe Flippo. It's getting weirder all the time. It's chapter 16 and 17 tonight. Thomas Robinette, the Bigfoot hunter. You know how it is, and you know where we are. If you've listened to some of our earlier stories, this will make sense to you where we're at right now. So let's just get into the story. Chapter 16, The Talk. Now later that evening, Danae made an unannounced appearance in the cavern where the people were resting. Eric addressed him in a trade language, and as he stood waiting for an answer, Danae walked over to the area around the fire and sat down with his legs crossed as he observed the humans doing. Now it was clear that he had something on his mind and he wished to communicate it, but his actions showed that he was antagonized as to how to breach the subject. Many things have taken place in short time. Danae signed this to Eric. The Sasqui have no way to know if it is good for the Sasqui or bad for the Sasqui. I know all of the answers since I am Alpha, but there are some things Danae does not know. Well, maybe as Danae's allies, this is Eric signing, we can help Danae understand. We're not evil Washis, we're good-willed people. Once, answered Danae, Da told me that Washis could not speak. Washis could not think as Sasquis. Da said that Washis were not like people, like the Sasquis, but smaller, lesser, two-leggeds that have no spirit, only reactions. Now Danae knows different. Many Sasquis do not know differently, even now. They wish to throw away Washis here and leave this place because they feel that the Washis have polluted this home. It's not our intent to pollute your home, Emory said after Eric explained what had been signed. We should leave, Eric signed to Danae. Danae is embarrassed, he answered Eric. Danae is new leader. Da began his journey to the sky people only 2 full moons before his brother died in battle. Many Sasqui warriors died in battle in such short time. And those who trusted me to lead our Sasqui will be angry with me. Danae must feed the life givers, the old ones and the young ones, all cold time. Many best hunters died in battle with wolf hunters. Old life givers say Danae bring evil to our home by saving evil Washis. Danae not think Washis here are evil. Many unknowns, few answers. Danae wants to be allies with the good Washis, avoid the bad Washis. Without allies, Sasqui dies now. With allies, Sasqui no longer stay, Sasqui much longer. Well, what if there is an answer, Thomas asked Danae, that made it possible for Danae to feed the Sasquis and remain a Sasqui without changing anything but what you know about Washis? Grunted Danae. Danae would listen to think about this. Actually, Danae, Emory spoke, I have a solution that may be in the best interest of both of our people. Speak of this, Washi Emory, Danae encouraged. Emory motioned for Eric to sign what he was about to say. And it went as this. We are from a private company. Our company helps to ensure that there's no conflicts between Washis and other people. Now, I was wondering if you would be interested in cooperating with us to help our company learn about your people as we help your people learn about us. What would it take to get you to trust us as friends? Now, if I can bring elk to this valley to help your people eat during the cold time, would you agree? I want you to think about this, and I want you to give me a serious and an honest answer. But Danae must feed Sasquis, exclaimed Danae. Battle sounds have scared away all four-legged. There is no food for us. We will have to leave this place. For many cold times, this has been the home of the Sasquis. This place has been the safe place for the old. This place has also been the playground of the young. This place has been the first place that Sasquis see when entering this world from life-givers. Danae does not wish to leave here. Well, if we provided you with elk to hunt, will you stay here? Asked Kevin. The Sasqui would stay. Danae would be friends with the Washis until I traveled to the land of the Sky People, but only to these Washis here. Well, how about this? Asked Emory. Let's say you can get 2 hands of four-leggeds that whistle. How much will that help your people? 1 hand nights of food will 2 hands feed my people, Danae answered. Tomorrow I can have that many here, Emory stated. But if you will agree to allow us to take the eldest young males who brought us wood with us, when we leave, we would like to leave some people here as a temporary trade to learn about your ways as we teach him our ways so that he can return and share what he learned while he was with us. No, stated Danae. Sasqui needs other Sasqui or Sasquis die. It is the way of things among our people. No Sasqui can live a long time before their spirit takes the journey to the Sky People. Okay, offered Emory. What if we agreed to take him and his 2 younger brothers? They would remain together all the time and can return home whenever they get homesick. And while they're with us, we will teach them our ways. We'll teach them our stories. They will learn to understand how to know if a Washi is good or a Washi is evil, and we'll teach them when to hide from Washis and when to interact with them. In exchange for this, we will bring other Washis who can communicate by the trade language to learn about your people. And because we'll be bringing our people here, if you agree with us to do this, I can promise you that I can bring 2 hand of elk for each finger on both of my hands. We call that number 100. If you can find a way to bring 100 elks here, Danae will agree because Danae thinks no one has that many elks. Danae welcomes your Washis. Only your Washis will be allowed to come as long as they respect Sasqui's ways. If it pleases you, Danae, Eric interjected, I would personally like to come and live among your people and learn their ways. I also can share my knowledge as I see the world, and with help we can both build a bridge between our peoples without recreating the mistakes of the past. Well, it's not good Washi to be alone among Sasquis, Danae stated. Washi Eric must pick a life giver to come with you. Each warrior who comes must bring his mate with him if he has one. This will stop the young life givers from wishing to be Washi Eric's mate. I will bring my mate, Eric signed to Danae. Then he lifted up his gaze from their conversation and addressed Katie. Katie, he said, Danae has only agreed to let 3 pairs of humans come here at the most. His terms dictate that you and I return as the intercessors for the expedition members. Wow, sighed Katie. Of course I'll be happy to come. I'll be an honor to interact with the females of this community. I didn't know that she was your mate, Danae signed to Eric. Yeah, and that's understandable, Eric replied with a smile. She doesn't even know it yet, but she's already chosen me. Washi life givers must be very much like Sasqui life givers in their ways, Danae signed. We call them the opposite of us, Eric said, because they usually do the exact opposite of what we tell them to do. Washi life givers must be exactly like Sasqui life givers, Danae exclaimed with a smile. Maybe there is hope for our people to be allies and friends after all. I'll tell you what, Danae, Emory answered to Sasqui. If you allow us to leave tonight, we will be back within 3 nights to deliver at least the first part of your elk. At that time, if you still agree with our terms, we will leave anyone you allow to stay and take the 3 brothers with us. If you decide not to agree, then we leave as friends. Now, does that sound fair to you? Danae grunted in agreement. Sounds fair. Danae will take you back to your village down where the hunters died. Within 5 minutes, everyone was packed and ready to leave for the Sinclair camp. Danae led the Washies to their abandoned razors, trotted alongside them as they made their way to the battered campsite. The journey back to camp was interesting to Kate and Marianne because, well, they'd been inside the caverns during the battles. They hadn't seen all the damage that had been inflicted on the surroundings. Although there were large pools of dark coagulating liquids in random places, the bodies of the dead combatants had been removed and the area had been cleaned up to some degree. After about a half hour, the group arrived at the camp and found a medium-sized military-style tent left behind by Tommy Hennessy with dry wood, extra fuel, dry clothes, cots, and bedding, and food enough to last the expedition at least a week. Now, the wrecked vehicles had also been taken away, and there were 2 four-wheel drive Jeep Rubicons left beside the tent with the keys in the ignition. On the driver's seats of the 2 Jeeps, there was a map showing where the base camp was located in relation to the Sinclair camp, and 2 analog compasses to supplement the GPS-linked compasses that were made into the dashes of the Jeeps. Now, both Jeeps were quickly uncovered. Everything was checked to make sure that the vehicles were operational. Last, Owen and Easton began preparing the 2 vehicles to leave camp. After seeing the group was safely at their camp, Danae silently left without saying a word. One minute he was there, the next minute he had vanished, as if he had never been there. While everyone went about fixing different things in the camp to make it more comfortable, Emory plugged his satellite phone into the charger that was left plugged into a USB port in one of the Jeeps and began calling in to check on the status of his order of elk. He was pleased to find out that Crystal already had 2/3 of the elk transported into the base camp. She was in the process of arranging handlers to herd them towards the Sinclair camp when she answered her phone. She went directly into her situation report, and Emory had all of his answers without even having to ask his questions. After giving Emory a status report and taking care of her professional updates, Crystal gave Emory an update regarding Jimmy and Jake. Neither one had life-threatening injuries, although Jimmy had a contusion on his forehead. Jimmy would recover, but his recovery would last another couple of weeks, according to the doctor who was treating him. Now, Jake was checked out, and after receiving treatment, including some random stitching, was back to bouncing around like an impatient puppy. Crystal had taken it upon herself to personally care for Jake while Thomas was away. Although he enjoyed her company, she could tell that he wanted to be reunited with Thomas, so she arranged for Jake to return with the delivery of the elk. Crystal informed Emory that the first part of the herd should be arriving by midday the following day, by the latest. So she suggested that he take the time to rest a little, take a shower, get a good meal. After repeating yes ma'ams, Emory hung up his call. Emory then informed Thomas that Jake would be reunited with the party when the herd of elk arrived midday the next day. Thomas did miss Jake, and the news was welcome relief. Now, the explorers spent the rest of the night taking turns using the portable shower and resting around the campfire after supper, sort of like we do. Thomas took it upon himself to build the campfire up after the meal had been cooked on it, and he went over to where the firewood was stacked and picked out 3 logs about 4 feet long and about 10 inches in diameter. And after choosing those logs, he went back and found some smaller limbs around 3 inches thick and made spacers out of them by carving out crescent moon-shaped gouges. Then he raked up all the shavings into a pile and carried the first log over to the campfire. Owen and Easton saw what Thomas was doing and they got up to give him a hand. As Thomas placed the first 2 spacers on each side of the coals, Easton brought the second log over and sat it down. Without being instructed, he used a hatchet that was left behind by one of the soldiers and chopped off 2 lines of bark about 2 inches wide and 180 degrees from each other. Thomas placed 2 spacers on the top of the first log so that Easton could place the second log on top of the first one and the bare inner wood facing down. By the time that Owen had arrived with his third log, they were ready for it to be placed on top of the second. Finally, Thomas went back for the shavings and spread them under the first logs onto the coals, as Easton and Owen stuffed small twigs and pine cones into the spaces between the tops of the two logs. This fire caught easily after the campfire coals were scattered along the bottom log and in between the bottom and the middle logs. Now this is what I enjoy almost more than anything, Thomas said, to nobody in particular. Being around a good warm fire on a cool night deep in the woods can solve a lot of life's problems just by separating yourself away from them for a minute and just listening to the wood pop. Well, I agree, answered Owen. I've been in a lot of sticky situations where I had to hide out and get warm so that I didn't freeze to death. Something about even a small fire in a dark place can be comforting. Kind of like that night over in Panshir Valley, Easton began, but he stopped short for explaining. Yeah, that's right, Owen answered. We built a lot of small fires in the Valley of Five Lions before we left Afghanistan, and I was beginning to wonder if we were ever going to see any sizable amount of water again. Yeah, answered Easton. When those people called us Barmanu, I thought they were just being friendly. Yeah, well, what does Barmanu mean in English? Queried Thomas. We always thought that the locals were calling us wild men because we were fearless and would tackle anything, Easton said. Yeah, added Owen, but it wasn't until we came across one that we realized that they were actually calling us the Pashto version of Bigfoot. In other words, they were saying that we were big, ugly, hairy, and stinky. Do you think that those dogmen will come back? Queried Marianne. I don't know, Thomas answered. Part of me wants to think that Dene and his warriors ran them off for good, or at least for a couple of days, but my gut tells me that we may not have seen the last of them, especially if we bring in a large herd of elk. Well, that may well be true, Emory spoke up as he brought a folding chair out of the tent to sit on. I think that it would be wise to sit up in a rotating guard for the night. Well, there's 6 of us here, Kevin said. We can sit up in pairs for 3 hours, each starting at 2100. We can all get a good rest if the night is quiet. We can let the women sleep throughout the night as they shouldn't be needed anyway. Well, that sounds fine with me, Thomas answered. I don't mind taking the first watch. Being out here by this fire is comfortable to me as being back home by my campfire. Well, then I will share the first watch with you, Emory stated. Owen, you and Eric plan on taking the second watch around dark 30, and Kevin can share the third watch with Easton starting about 0300. In this way, we'll have alert and professionally trained eyes on each shift. Yeah, that sounds good to me, answered Kevin. I think I'll go into the tent and tell the girls what we're doing, then head off to Dreamland. Somebody wake me up about 0245. Within 15 minutes, everyone had turned in for the night except for Emory and Thomas. Thomas took his time to clean up and put away all the chairs that were left, except for the one occupied by Emory. Then he went over to the woodpile and picked out a log about 30 inches in diameter and rolled it over to the fire across from Emory. That log's going to get mighty uncomfortable after a while, Emory stated. Hell, that's the point, smiled Thomas. I don't want to get too comfortable. Now, why is that? Asked Emory. Well, began Thomas, when I first began to investigate and look for boogers, as we call them down south, I'd sit outside at night in my backyard and burn a campfire by myself. It was my way of unwinding for years before I saw my first one. After me and my first wife got our divorce, I spent even more nights out there alone just by burning dried oak and hickory, listening to the flames pop the wood as it swelled. I got a lot of calls locally during that time, and I honestly think that a couple of boogers recognized me and began showing up at the boundary of my yard at the tree line just to watch my fire. I saw eye shines many times, and often multiple pairs. One day I went to the store and saw a beautiful Lazy Boy recliner that I just had to have. I bought it and had it delivered to my house. Well, that's when I got this bright idea to take the old pleather recliner that I had already out to my campfire and sit in it and watch the fire. I figured that the pleather would be pretty much waterproof since it didn't have any tears in it, and I wouldn't have to get rid of it because I still enjoyed that chair. Well, that evening I went out there to my campfire and built a good one, just like the one I built tonight. I went into the house and got me a Crown and Coke and went back out and sat back onto my recliner and watched the fire. I didn't even take a sip of my drink before I went to sleep, feeling the heat off the fire and the cool night air mixing around my chair. Well, about 2 o'clock in the morning, something woke me up. Thinking back, I think it was the fact that everything actually was silent. Maybe I heard a word sound or something, I really don't know, but I woke up. Looking out across my fire, I saw 2 boogers inside my mowed yard boundary and under a willow tree. They were an adult female and a pre-adolescent female. They were slowly making their way towards me. And I don't know why, but I think that they were just curious to know if I was sleeping or just being still, but that's just conjecture on my part. When I saw them within 40 feet of me, I stood up and pulled the back off my recliner and threw it into the fire. Between the pleather and the sponge cushion on the back, my fire blazed up high and fast, making its own wind as it did. These 2 females stood absolutely still with their mouths gaping open as widely as they could. I looked at them and yelled, asking them, "What are y'all looking at?" and picked up the bottom and threw it into the fire as well. The fire rose up again and they took off in 2 different directions, shrieking like the devil himself was after them. I decided right then and there that I was never going to get comfortable enough to go to sleep around a fire again, as long as there was a chance of even a young booger getting around. You see, I don't know what their intentions were, but I remembered the Ostman story about him getting carried off by an old male, and I wasn't going to get carried off by one. "Wow," exclaimed Emory, "that's an amazing account. Was it the last time you saw boogers, as you call them, on your property?" "Oh, no," answered Thomas. "Matter of fact, that young female became obsessed with the goings-on at my house. She was always out there in the dark, waiting to see if she was going to get to watch my fire after the sun went down. She has even divided out my garbage by color, material, and whether the containers might contain food or not. I used to leave the TV on Nickelodeon Kids channel at night with the window blinds open so that she could watch it while I slept. I can't tell you how many times I've watched greasy nose smudges off my windows where she put her nose there and breathed it while watching the channel. I eventually put the TV out on my sunroom table so that she could watch it. Once she got used to watching it through the full-length window, she never put her nose on my window again." "Well, that's interesting," Thomas Emory said. "You really are interested in how they think about things. I've never known of anyone else who stopped to consider what their side of the story was. Most people see cryptids and they automatically think that they're the victim and the cryptid is the automatic aggressor. You don't, do you? The world would be a much better place if more people thought like you did." "Well, I appreciate your compliment," Thomas answered, but it seems like everyone here has seen the dossier on me and knows a lot about me, and I'm at a disadvantage. I don't know anyone's story past what you told me about them, and asking questions seems to be a taboo in my mind here in this situation." "Well, I'll tell you about myself, but if you learn about anyone else here beyond how they relate to me, it'll be you hearing it from them," Emory confided. "As you know, Leviathan International started after World War II. However, it really started back in World War I. You see, General John J. Pershing, old Black Jack himself, was in charge of the American Expeditionary Force, the AEF, in Europe in World War I. And before his main force landed in France in June of 1917, Pershing sent a secret scouting party ahead into France. The party was rowed in from commercial vessels and dropped off near Boulogne weeks before Black Jack arrived himself. The team consisted of 8 men. They were of different nationalities so that they wouldn't be thought to be associated with each other. Now, there was no exit strategy for the advance party of scouts. They were told that once inserted into France, they would be able to easily reconnect with the AEF after Pershing arrived with the main force. Their job was to infiltrate and observe. Each man was given enough money to survive off of for 2 weeks in France. Anyone carrying more money than that would arouse suspicion because spies were thought to be abundant in France. After the scouting party had been in country in France for about 10 days, they found that they had traveled a good distance from the coast. They came to a small town by the name of Locon, As night was falling, they began to look for a place to sleep that night. Nowhere was available in the town, so they began to head north on a road that is now a section of D 845. Out in the field near the Rue Pierre Lalande, they came upon an old homestead with a small enclosed barn. The leader went to the door of the house and knocked. When a young boy answered the door, he asked if there were any adults around. The boy, who looked to be about 12 years of age, told the leader that he was the only one who lived in the house. The leader asked the boy if he could sleep in the barn for the night. He even offered to pay the boy some money for the barn if rent was necessary. Well, the boy seemed pretty excited to have a guest, so he agreed to let the leader sleep in the barn as long as he promised to keep the doors locked all night and not leave the barn until after sunrise the next morning. He explained to the leader that a local area had strange things happening at night, but he didn't want to seem like a foolish child in front of this full-grown man. He said that he would prefer to have the man staying inside his house for safety reasons. That was when the leader told the boy about his friends. The boy was even happier that there were more men than just one. He invited them to all stay with him inside the house. Seeing that they were welcomed, the men came out of hiding and entered the house. They noticed the boy barely had food to feed himself, so the men brought out food from their individual packs and shared food with the boy. The boy hadn't eaten so well in weeks, and in gratitude, he offered to let the leader sleep in his bed, and he volunteered to sleep in the barn to keep a nightly vigil while the men slept. The leader declined, but said that any of his men who wanted to sleep in the house was welcome to do so with thanks. After eating, the leader, who was a marksman with a rifle, and his spotter, went out to sleep in the loft of the barn while the other men slept in the house. The next morning, after the sun came up, the leader went to the house to wake up his men who should have already been up and ready. When he got to the house, he saw that the door was open. He pushed it wide enough to go inside and drew his pistol. The inside of the house was like a scene from a horror movie. All of his men were dead. They had been murdered in the most grotesque way possible. Each man had his throat torn out, he was eviscerated, and the heart and the liver were missing from all of them. The leader's spotter followed him into the room with his pistol drawn as well. They found the young boy slumped into a pile in the corner under the mattress of his bed. The outer side of the mattress was soaked through with blood and bile and urine, but he was still alive when they checked him. On the boy's arm there was a bite mark along just the middle of his right bicep. He had a high fever, and he was sweating disproportionately to what he thought was physically possible. As the leader and his spotter tried to decide what to do with the boy, he began mumbling and crying for his mother. The leader bent down closer to the boy and tried to hear what he was mumbling. Suddenly, the boy's eyes erupted open and he snapped at the man's ear. Now, the man was quick enough to avoid losing his ear, but not quick enough to prevent the boy from grazing his shoulders with these canine teeth. Before the leader could respond, his spotter shot the boy in the top of his head. The boy made one last effort to bite the leader as his spotter severed his head from his body with his combat knife. In a look of disbelief, the leader asked the spotter why he acted in such a violent and callous manner. The spotter, a Cajun from Louisiana, told his leader that the boy was a vampire that could walk in daylight. Because there wasn't any water in the house, the spotter licked his handkerchief and rubbed the leader's wound. He cleaned the scratches on the leader's shoulders best he could and told him that he may be infected with the disease that the boy had. He explained that the boy must have a disease similar to both rabies and what we call celiac disease now, because his body can't absorb much nutrients. The disease caused the body to crave blood, which could be easily digested and absorbed by the faulty cilia in the boy's intestines. The spotter watched the leader for days before he was convinced that the leader wasn't infected. Now, I know this sounds crazy coming from a guy who chases Bigfoot around, Thomas interjected, but I find it hard to believe in vampires. However, since I have clearly seen what looks like some kind of dogman or werewolf in the last few days, I'm beginning to believe that anything is possible. Please forgive my interruption. Well, most people would tend to agree with you, Emory confessed. However, that's not the end of the story. You see, that leader was changed in a way that wouldn't be noticed for several years. What was supposed to be a 2-month scouting recon turned into a 1-year ordeal. He began having nightmares about strangers talking to him in his head. At first, he kept the voices to himself, but when they began telling him to kill his spotter, he woke his only friend up and told him everything that had been going on since he was bitten. The spotter took his team leader up onto the roof of their hideout and waited for the sun to rise. They sat watching it in silence as the voices within him ordered the leader off of the roof. Then, they threatened his life if he didn't remove himself from the roof. When that didn't work, they threatened the lives of his wife back home and his 4 children. Nothing worked. So they began begging him to come down as the sun peeked out over the horizon. The voices died in agony as the sunlight rushed over his body. After everything was silent, the leader told his spotter what happened to the voices. The spotter smiled at his leader and told him that he had been exorcised of his demons and he should be all right. It was when the spotter smiled at his leader that the leader noticed his extended canine teeth. At first he thought he was just hallucinating, but as they kept talking, he noticed that they were still the same. He asked the spotter about them. Well, the spotter told him that he was also a vampire, but he wasn't the same as the boy. Without any more explanations, the spotter rose and ran off of the roof of the house where they were sitting and disappeared down the road, leaving the leader where he was all alone. Eventually, the leader returned to General Pershing and gave his report. He also showed Blackjack his scarred shoulder. Then, about 2 years later, the leader was in battle and he was shot. He was hit with a shotgun slug directly on the sternum. He was knocked down by the blast and thought he was going to die. He laid there in the trench where he was shot in agony until something miraculous began to happen. His ragged wound began to heal right in front of him. And within minutes he was feeling better than he'd ever felt in his entire life. First he thought he'd died, but even after standing up and walking to a medical tent, getting checked out, he found out that he was indeed still alive. He went and served with Pershing for the rest of the war. Now, skipping along ahead in time, this young leader was promoted to the rank of Brigadier General by the time World War II was initiated. He'd also learned a tough lesson. The spotter that cleaned his wound all those years back used his saliva to clean his wound on his shoulder. He had inadvertently infected the leader with a very mild case of the disease that he also carried. The disease was unable to take control of the young leader's body because of his great genetics and strong immune system. Not only was he healthy and alive, but his body was able to regenerate itself rapidly, and he aged at a very retarded rate. It was during his campaign in northern Africa during the war that the young Brigadier General first met others like him. He was sitting at supper one night when he began to feel something buzzing in his head. First, he thought he was just mildly intoxicated, but then he remembered that he hadn't been able to become intoxicated for decades. He left his supper on the table and went for a walk. He noticed that as he walked in one direction, the buzzing got louder in his head. When he turned around and walked in the opposite direction, the buzzing kind of diminished slightly. Well, he continued following the buzzing inside of his head until he came to a dark alley. Inside that alley, there was an African man feeding on a young African woman. She had lost her tremendous bout of blood. The Brigadier General yelled for the man to stop, and the man turned on him. What should have been an easy meal for the predator ended with his demise and the loss of his head. That was the day that the Brigadier General decided that at the end of the war he would return to destroy any others that caused his head to buzz. And as they say, the rest is history. Leviathan International was created to deal with these and other cryptids. I have to admit your account is very amazing, Thomas said. But how do you know that the story is true? Have you ever asked the general if he can show you the scars? I would think that'd be the best way to convince anyone about the cryptids were real. I don't have to ask him to show me the scars, Emory answered. I see them every time I take a shower. And after saying that, Emory lifted his shirt to show Thomas his chest and his shoulder. And sure enough, there were the scars, as he mentioned them, along with a few others that he didn't mention. Now, as you can see, Emory stated, I have a very obvious reminder as to why we are relevant in this world. Wow, exclaimed Thomas. What is your relationship to Kevin and Kate Sinclair? Well, Kevin and Kate are my youngest progenies, Emory answered. I am their third great-grandfather. My youngest son was their second great-grandfather. His son was their great-grandfather, and his eldest son was their grandfather. I have literally reared them to take over this company one day, should I die before them. However, it seems that I have passed along some of my enhanced DNA to my progenies, although at a little lesser degree than I'm affected. I have watched them grow from infancy to become wonderful adults. To me, they will always be my little babies, but I also can allow them to grow up and become successful adults. When I do that, I get to enjoy my success as a progenitor as the generations below me increase. Well, you are really blessed in that way, Thomas opined. Many men would sacrifice their right gonad to trade places with you. There are pros and cons to living this way, Emory said. When I lost my first wife, I prayed to die alongside her. When my eldest son died, I thought that I was cursed beyond salvation. However, as I continue to live, I have understood that we each are given a task to complete while we are upon this earth. And my task is to make sure that humanity continues. That's both noble and terrifying at times. Even though I have no fear of death, I do try to prevent feeling unnecessary pain. Now, that day that you met me at your house was the first time I had been beyond the walls of my Leviathan International compound in many years. However, I made a promise to my progeny that if they ever needed me, I'd be there. And if they ever became missing in the field, I would find them. And if they were killed, I would return their remains to home. Sometimes just that little bit of hope is enough to keep a person's wits about him, even in the most dire of circumstances. I saw the questions in your eye when we first found Kate and Kevin. I also noticed how you never asked those questions. At the time, I felt as though you had other reasons to distrust me or reasons why I should be wary of you. However, as I have come to spend more time with you and got to know you as a person, I have come to realize that my mistrust was unwarranted. For this, I ask your forgiveness for my pridefulness. There really is nothing to forgive, Emory, Thomas had said. I can admit that I've asked myself what I've got myself into here, but it wasn't because I distrusted anyone here. It was more that I doubted my ability to be of service to you. To be honest with you, when I quoted my price to join you on this adventure, I figured that you would have laughed and left. That's what I expected. Even now, sitting here listening to all your team of professionals, I still don't see how I've contributed beyond just being an extra set of eyes, ears, and being a dog handler. See, I'm just a man who's seen something that he couldn't explain at some time, made a choice to find out all that I could about it, and then share what I've learned with others, because I would have done anything in the beginning to find someone with the answers that I've found out through lots of hard work, blood, sweat, tears, and mostly ignorance. Even if I were interested in proving that Sasquatch exists to the scientific community, my thinking is that those who should be made aware of them already know all about them. Now, I can verify this from first-hand experience, Emory assured Thomas. Every sovereign country in the world knows about various bipedal hominids that live within their borders. It's not only their job to know about them, but also to maintain the peace between those species and modern humans. I never knew what an interest about these creatures would expose me to, said Thomas, but these Sasquatch are more like self-aware humans than non-human primates that I've encountered in the past. It seems as if the word Bigfoot is a catch-all word to include multiple types of species and either non-human apes or archaic humans. It really is a disservice to all of them not to be understood separately as individual species. Now, I couldn't agree with you more, Thomas, answered Emory. That's why I want to offer you a permanent place with our company. You may not realize your worth, but you stated it plainly and better than I could if you're thinking about how to convince you to join us, which is what I was actually building up to. You see, you've actually laid eyes on these different species of animals. You've taken it upon yourself to learn the differences, the various behaviors of different subspecies of whatever these cryptids actually are. And unlike most people, you don't just see a monster and run away out of ignorant fear. You observe, you remember, you record, and then you share your findings with others who are interested. Now, I've watched every seminar that you gave publicly. I watched your body language as much as I listened to your words. I researched every possible fact that I could, and I've found that everything that you say is not only possible, but indeed plausible. I know for a fact that there are military experts who would sacrifice their whole careers just to be able to sit and watch what you have seen. Nobody, and I do mean nobody, has ever talked about any Bigfoot species' way of thoughts or how their mind works. They're not a mystery to you as they are to others who claim to be Bigfoot experts. I surmise that most of those people are just reading things on the internet and going out and harassing the local breeding populations and running back to their vehicles like teenagers who are playing pranks. I won't even legitimize their mimicking of calls and that they heard by commenting on that. I do appreciate your offer, Emory, Thomas said, but before I give you a definitive answer, I really need to discuss this with wife Sarah. However, as long as she can live with whatever compromise I can uphold, she knows that this subject is my passion. She wants me to enjoy it as long as I don't let it replace her and the boys. You know, they're my top priorities. Well, that's the most honest answer I could ask for, Emory agreed. Easton silently exited the main tent with a percolating coffee pot while Thomas and Emory were talking. After digging through the rear of one of the Jeeps, he found some coffee grounds and some creamer. He filled up the pot with water from the back of the Jeep and walked over to the fire after grabbing a few styrofoam cups. I see it's been quiet so far this morning, smiled Easton. Then he said, Eric will be out in a minute. I woke him up as I came outside. Well, I didn't realize that we'd been out here this long, Thomas stated. Time does go by quickly when you have good company around a fire. Well, I figured since you were out here with Emory in the dark, he would have told you some of his stories by now, then you would have had your hair standing on end. Easton laughed. I've had a lot of guard duty in the past 5 years where the only thing kept me awake was thinking about his stories. Eric exited the tent. He grew up with Kevin and had his own share of scary stories to keep him up at night on guard duty, if he'd actually stood on guard duty. When he heard Easton's comments, he couldn't help but to think of one of those nights that he and Eric had spent with Emory outside of the Swiss town of Malls, trying to track down the creature known as the Le Lion. What their first expedition found over there was both horrifying and unforgettable. They lost 11 of their original expedition crew of 25 before they discovered that the legend of Le Lion was more ancient than civilization in the Swiss mountains. Then there was the time they were investigating the Leshy in Siberia. That experience was extra creepy to Eric because their expedition could never catch a Leshy. The locals rumored that the creature could change shapes and sizes from as small as a blade of grass to as large as a full-grown tree. He was also interested in mischievousness, although he wasn't thought to be malevolent. He would wear his clothes backwards, call out people wandering around in his forest, and if he lured an unsuspecting person into his cave, he would tickle them to death. Now, those stories were always the creepiest to Eric. After a short chat, Emory and Thomas retired to their tent to get some much-needed sleep. Thomas was asleep almost before his head hit his cot. He had been running wide open since the expedition landed and they met up with Kevin, Kate, Eric, and Marianne. Being separated from Jake was a huge blow to him as well. That dog had always made him feel secure in the woods at night, even if he was without a flashlight. As he slept, he dreamt about his family and Jake. So many things were about to change for him. He was successfully completing his professional responsibilities to the satisfaction of his employer and was offered more opportunities to learn about cryptids all over the world. He would be able to build Sarah the house that he always wanted her to have. The boys would have greater opportunities as well. However, as Thomas thought about his good fortune, he couldn't help thinking that something ominous was looming just beyond the horizon. Well, there you go, folks. Promises of more excitement to come. Well, I'm glad y'all were here tonight and want to see y'all again. That'd be a lot of fun to see you next time we're here around this campfire. And until that time, think about the good times. They're important. And until then, this is Clay Steele. Good night.